Good morning. Thank you all for coming to this interesting panel about sustainable mobility and transportation. We will focus in this panel about challenges facing cities, especially in the MENA region today in regard to mobility and transportation. As most of you are well aware, some cities in Europe, USA, and some in the Arab countries started implementing solutions related to traffic congestion and lack of public transportation, while others, especially in the MENA region, haven't yet introduced such solutions and initiatives for environmental sustainability, such as demand management, low carbon solutions, etc. So what are the challenges facing these cities in the MENA region? Today, we're going to go through 3 interesting presentations. It is a pleasure for me to welcome our panelists, Dr. Youssef Fawaz, who will present a general overview of sustainable transportation, Mr. Tariq Rakha, who will present the design, the motives to design and retrofit cities to become walkable and bikeable built environments, and Mr. Hans Forke, who will have a presentation about sustainable urban mobility in Indonesian cities. We will have 20 minutes for each presentation. In principle, we will save half an hour for questions and answers at the end, but because Dr. Youssef Fawaz has to leave in earlier, we will start with his presentation and take a few questions. And also, I would like to thank him for coming in on a short notice and replacing Mr. Johnny Aujel, who was supposed to be here, but due to unforeseen circumstances, he was not able to make it. Dr. Youssef has a PhD in transportation from UC Berkeley. He worked for 6 years with Solidaire as their senior transportation planner. He's presently a consultant in transportation and urban planning and a senior lecturer at the AUB engineering faculty. Please, Dr. Youssef.
Thank you. I find myself, in a bit of an awkward position of having to give, on a short notice, the presentation developed by Johnny, who unfortunately couldn't travel from England because of a last-minute emergency. So it's always going to be a bit awkward giving someone else's presentation. However, in general, as I went through his presentation last night, after he sent it to me, I realized that actually we're more or less on the same page, because I've discussed with Johnny on a number of occasions some of the challenges facing the transportation sector in Lebanon. So I hope the result will not be too tedious for all the present. The challenges for anyone familiar with transportation in Beirut are many, and for professionals they become even more apparent than for the rest. Among them, we can very quickly list that there is an absence of a transportation master plan that is coherent and addresses the multifaceted issues that face the city of Beirut. We very much still work on a plot-by-plot basis. Nothing is more clear than this than within the central district of Solidaire, where every building has to develop its own parking strategy and its own traffic impact study. But both of them have no consequence at the larger policy matters in transportation, because there is no impact, there is no mitigation measures. I'm not even sure that anyone, even in the official DGU, even reads the traffic impact studies that are usually produced. Johnny was involved with Solidaire in the development of a transportation and traffic plan for the landfill, which is the area you see here on the top, which is practically still inhabited now, but which is to accommodate a high density of development in the coming 10 to 15 years. And Arab developed a traffic model to test the viability of the transportation system within that sector. Some general comments about transportation also in general is, first headline of it actually has become quite obvious for most of the world. Unfortunately, Lebanon has yet to catch up, and that is that new roads are not always the solution. We are still very much in a frame of mind in this country where adding roads is thought to contribute to alleviating congestion or solving transportation and traffic problem, which the rest of the world has quite discovered for the last 40 years does not quite work that way. A 1% increase in effectiveness of infrastructure would yield 7 times larger impacts on the economic growth than a 1% investment in the infrastructure. The last few points as well, I mean, they're platitudes, but they're worth repeating, that in the absence of an efficient and effective transportation system, you can negatively impact the economic development of a country. While it is no guarantee if you have a good system that the economy will pick up, but you can really be assured that if there is no effective transportation system, your economic success is very much in doubt. So for a place that, like the city center of Beirut, that depends a lot on attracting foreign investors and attracting foreign companies to come and establish their base, it really becomes key for them to offer top quality services, if not only in terms of infrastructure, but also telecommunication and the like. But they need also as well to focus on transportation. So transport remain one of the key factors that would define and help the survivability and the economic sustainability of a city center. In the course of the study, I think the first pie chart that you see would not surprise many who are familiar with the traffic situation in Beirut. 81% of the traffic within the city center was by private cars. Only 19% are distributed among taxis, minibuses, vans, and the rest. But all right, moving on. All right, so that second graph is also indicative of the situation within Beirut in general. It is quite different from many other cities that usually observe AM and PM peaks. What you can observe in the traffic volumes, be it during weekdays or weekends within the city center of Beirut, is that the peaks that begin relatively early in the morning, around 6, 7, actually are spread throughout the day, meaning there is essentially traffic congestion through the whole 12-hour days, from 6, 7 in the morning all the way to 7, 8 in the evening. There are no peaks that, like in any other Western city, you would see between, let's say, 7 and 9 in the morning and then 4 and 6 in the afternoon. For us in Beirut, the spread of the peak is throughout the day, indicating more or less continuous congestion. Added to that, we continue with the increase in urban population, with the continued centralization of all main government offices and becoming the center for the main public and private companies. Everyone wants to locate within Beirut itself, and all this coupled with a highly inadequate public transport system. So all this yields for a city the scale of Beirut that it is quite lagging behind the development activities. There is a lack of transport policies. There is a total absence of traffic management and parking policies. Limited choices. As you can see, 80% or above use their private cars because there is a lack of alternatives. The resulting carbon emissions are quite obvious, as we'll see in a couple of slides, and yielding to unacceptable congestion level. And all this yields ultimately to a consequence that it will make it very difficult for Beirut to become competitive on a world scale, or at least in the MENA region, in terms of attracting new businesses or relocating companies when they cannot offer a sustainable or efficient transportation system. So the implications are dire and they are multifaceted. Obviously, the congestion leads to all sorts of negative externalities. The environmental impacts are quite severe in terms of emissions of all sorts of noxious gases, the CO2 and NOx's and all the like, and with a negative impact on the economic growth. Quite worried that Beirut could come, at least the central district, would come to a standstill traffic-wise. And this slide just highlights the health negative impact of air pollution, something Beirutis are quite familiar with. In a paper presented last year here at the Issam Faris Institute on transportation, Johnny did work with myself and Mazen Amran on a paper on estimating the impact of congestion on the economy. And part of the estimate you see here is about what it costs in terms of work hours wasted for car users and bus users, whether it is they're heading to work or whether they're heading for another activity, non-work related, shopping or social visit. And the impact of these numbers become even clearer when you see when we ran a VISM model for the landfill within Beirut, you see the wide difference between a system that has no public transportation and one with public transportation. These are the two lines you have in front of you. It may not make a huge difference in terms of average travel speed and delays, but it makes a huge difference when it comes to the total delays. It's just about half during the AM peak and the PM peak in terms of how many, and you can just multiply the amount of hours of delay by the cost of the hour for work, and you can see the incredible total that would impact in terms of loss of productivity. I'm sure many of you must be familiar with this picture, again highlighting how much space it would occupy from a public street if you have a car only on the first to the left, and if you have a bus, and if you have bicycles. The amount of free space that results is incredible. Same on the freeway, maybe something you will not see in Beirut or in Lebanon, partly because there are no freeways, and partly because I don't think you'll ever see in Lebanon cars staying within their own lanes in the way they're so neatly lined up in this picture. But again, it highlights the amount of space and number of people and number of cars that are taken off the general population had we had, in this case, a bus rapid transit or more sophisticated public transportation system. One important dimension also that is becoming an important player is the fact that technology has made quite a bit of advances, particularly in terms of telecom and GSM and location, location, allowing now customers to know when a public bus is going to stop near to your house or near to your place of destination, and allowing you to plan your trip. One of the big disadvantages of public transportation has for a long time been its uncertainty about when the bus will come, when the metro will come, how long will you be for this. You need to plan ahead. Now, with the telecommunication and the GPS systems, you can practically know within a minute when a bus is going to stop at a particular bus station. And then you can plan your trip ahead, making it a far more reliable system than it used to be in the past. So the point is, after doing all the runs within the central district, Arab, at the time this found that unless 30% of the travelers, person trips coming to the downtown, shift to public transportation, the city center will face a gridlock in the next 10 to 15 years. It's a significant amount. And it's an amount that needs to be carefully planned in the coming years so it can be shifted to a public transportation mode. And the public transportation mode does not come overnight. It's not something which you can, by a push of a button, have it realized. The suggestion here is what is really lacking in this country, in particular, is to have some coherent policy that is being done at some high level of political decision-making. There needs to be political will that could develop and adopt and espouse a policy that could be multimodal in its breach and have some sort of executive implementable tools, which would be, in this case, the Integrated Transport Planning Unit. In many other outside cities in the US, their equivalent would be something like the MPO, the multi-regional planning organizations, and the like. The important is they should be the repository of policy that is developed over 5 to 10 years, and at the same time implements projects that all are part of a coherent total, be they in road, be they in rail, be they in public transport, be they in walking, and I would add to this slide, be they in parking. Without also a coherent parking policy that is implemented at the level of the agglomeration, the problem remains quite the same. One suggestion in this slide is for example, the potential use, what is today, in my opinion, maybe I'm not speaking for Johnny here, in my opinion, a useless exercise, which is the traffic impact study that the DGU asks from new development, is that people do a traffic impact study and they submit it with their building permit, but nothing happens to it. So one way to make it a bit more effective is to force the traffic impact study to come with mitigation measures. What could the developer provide in terms of solutions for addressing the negative impact of the new developments? And that could be defined either as fees or implementable project, physical project. And then they could be distributed among various pots, as Johnny would say here, where they could feed a cash inbox, which could be spent on improving either public transport or parking policies or highways and the like. Again, the last couple of slides are simply illustration of how a central policy could have a significant impact on and driving the various components of what could be the various objectives of that policy. This becomes even clearer in this slide, where we can have, for example, 5 key strategic objectives to have a safer and stronger society, a smarter transportation system, a wealthier and fairer society, a greener environment, a healthier environment. And out of these 5 general policy statements, strategic policy statements, we can already identify criteria that can help us measure how close we are to achieving that. And we can define also 3 key strategic outcomes that could be the improvement of quality, of accessibility and affordability, the improvement of journey times, travel times, reducing delays and connection and reducing delays. And then the criteria that help you decide whether you've achieved any of these policies by implementing your projects, whether you're successful or not. The concluding comment I would leave you with is that in this country, many of you familiar with the transportation sector must know that there has been plenty of studies. There are tens. I think one of the more significant landmark was done at the end of the war by Team International and the ORIF, which published a 20-volume master plan in transportation. Unfortunately, this and many subsequent studies and documents end up collecting dust in some sort of drawer somewhere, in some sort of administration. Part of the reason is because we lack a coherent policy that is driven by political will that needs to see it implemented. And our inability to develop that coherent policy and generate that political will needed to push ahead a comprehensive multimodal transport policy will remain, if it is ineffective, will leave us with the sort of piecemeal solutions that we've been observing, with the sort of dire consequences we see today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Fawaz. We have 10 minutes for questions and answers.
Thank you very much. My name is Raouf Dabbas. I'm the Senior Advisor at the Ministry of Environment in Jordan. Okay, we've heard and we know that you have a serious problem coming up in about 15 years. What's the solution? How can this situation in Beirut change? I mean, there is a gridlock in the government now. Parliament barely talks together, and the cabinet also. So you're doomed?
No, I really wouldn't say so. Yes, there is gridlock in government, but the gridlock is on issues, of intergalactic nature. Who are our allies, and who do we stand with Mars and Jupiter for this or this? But I think, to be serious, there is a reasonable chance that we can adopt policies that can be bipartisan, if I can use the word, that could be between opposition and the non-opposition, or whatever that means in the Lebanese context, in which people can agree on a joint policy. And I think transportation is a good place in which people on both sides of whatever other issues political divide them can come together and agree that for the next 5 years, we really need to think that emissions within Beirut need to be reduced by 10%, that we need to develop a comprehensive public transport policy. If this could come about, and I think there is no reason why it shouldn't, except if people have completely, at the level of parliament, abdicated their responsibilities, then yes, we would be doomed, but we don't have to.
Hello. Thank you very much for your presentation, especially on such an aspect, Haida. So I'm part of the National Coalition on Sustainable Transportation, and we've recently been meeting with Ustaz Al-Aisi of the Ministry of Transportation, and he's explained to us the situation that their response is to implement this bus system, this very elaborate GPS, very nicely designed buses, stops, everything. And he explains to us that the main obstacle is that the Ministry of Finance is not giving them the funds necessary, funds to implement the project. And this has been the case for over 4 years now, that Parliament puts off, this 2 years ago, the ministry says, okay, we'll give you the money in 2004. And then now they're saying we're going to give them to you next year. And we are worried that this is going to continue to happen because it is not a priority issue in Beirut, in Lebanon. But it needs to be a priority issue. It needed to be 10 years ago. And so I want to ask you what you think about this. I mean, we're ready to lobby. We're ready to do many things. But what do you think? This is pretty ridiculous, yani. So what's...
I'm certain, yes, there may be an issue with the Ministry of Finance refusing to fund the project of the Ministry of Transport for public transport, for the purchase of buses. However, I'm not even sure if they get the money that would be the solution to public transportation. I think we've gone down that road 10 years ago. In 1998 or 99, we purchased 200 buses. Today, of the 200 buses, there are only 10 that remain operational within the city. Again, I think the deeper problem is not whether we buy buses and that would be public transportation. It really needs to be a multi-modal, multilateral approach. There are all sorts of issues. We can't simply throw in buses in a city and think that this will develop into a coherent public transport policy. It really needs to be thought out with the other aspects of it, parking being an important dimension. Traffic management cannot continue the way it is. Regulating the existing taxi service and the jitneys and the vans and all the other systems that operate in parallel that today have absolutely no regulation. So short of addressing all these things, simply purchasing 200 additional buses, in my opinion, will not be part of the solution. It will simply be throwing money and wasting it again. Sorry to appear a bit gloom on this, but I really think so, because we went down this road 10 years ago, and it took us nowhere. Literally, we're down to 10 buses out of 200.
One more question.
شكرا. صباح الخير. عبد اللطيف البركي من المغرب. سؤالي للأستاذ هو الدراسة التي قمتم بها هي دراسة أكاديمية مستقلة، وفي هذه الحال طبعا من المفروض أن لا تكون ملزمة بالنسبة للجهات، وهذا السؤال يجرني إلى سؤال ثاني، هو في المستقبل هل هناك إمكانيات القيام بدراسات مع الجهات المسؤولة أو المعنية باتخاذ القرار لكي طبعا تكون نتائج الدراسة ملزمة وعملية وفعالة؟ شكرا.
The study, actually the one mentioned by Johnny and Arab, conducted by Arab, was actually a private study paid for by Solidaire, the private company in charge of redeveloping the downtown. And they were concerned and had questions about the viability, traffic-wise, of the newly developed landfill, given the densities they intend to put on it. So that was not a public study. For the rest, doing studies that have the blessing of the government or public authorities, again, I can give you, there are dozens, literally dozens. I think every 2-3 years, the Ministry of Transport does a study on the need for buses. And they have like 5 or 6 over the last 10 years that again come back and do the same of research and same study and recommend the need for buses, whether it's a BRT or not BRT or something with feeder system. And again, the study goes back into the drawer, and then next administration comes back and repeats the same steps. It is not, I don't think this country needs any more studies. I don't think we even need to decide on what specific bus system we need, whether it has GPS or doesn't have the GPS. We really need political will at the level of to be willing to push for an overwhelming, overall comprehensive transport policy.
Okay. الياس معلوف الياس معلوف جمعية ترين بالاتحاد اللبناني للنقل المستدام. بدي أسألك هل أنت عم تتابع الدراسات اللي انعملت أخيراً، وبتعرف ليه عم تنحجب بوجه المجتمع المدني؟ ممنوع نطلع على الدراسات، ممنوع حدا يشوف نسخة عن الدراسات. كمان أنت عم تحكي عن مشروع الباصز. ما نحن هلا نحن عارفانين انه في مشكله، بس نحن we depend with professionals منكم مثلكم لنقدر نعرف اذا هالدراسات موجوده، اذا في شيء بوليسي. هل انت مستعد تساعد المجتمع المدني ليقدر يشتغل على توجيه الجفرمنت على هالقضيه اللي هي كثير مهمه صارت؟
Totally. I mean, I think it's outrageous if at the end of the day policies and transportation projects that are implemented should be to the benefit of society, essentially citizens, so people like you and me. And I think as a minimum, society should have a say and should have a right to comment and be exposed and discuss and give its opinion or objections on whatever projects are being planned. And I think it's a great disservice that the government would do by not providing information about projects they intend to conduct in this field.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fawad.
Thank you, and my sincere apologies for leaving early on this one.
We will continue now with Tariq's presentation. Tariq Rekha is an instructor and PhD candidate in building technology in the Department of Architecture, School of Architecture and Planning at MIT. He is a member of the MIT Sustainable Design Lab and currently the principal instructor for a seminar called Comfort in Motion, design strategies to promote human-powered mobility through comfortable outdoor spaces. He is a practicing architect in Egypt with a deep interest in integrating sustainability with design practice. As an academic, he seeks to combine multidisciplinary research approaches to issues of sustainability in architectural design.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming today, and thanks a lot for the invitation. My presentation is entitled Which Smart Mobility? Basically, I'm trying to convince you about sustainability through human-powered transportation. But I'm going to take a moment to give you a little bit of a background about what I do back at MIT. I am part of the Sustainable Design Lab headed by Professor Christoph Reinhardt, and we model cities. We work in building technology and building science generally. If you go to urbanmodeling.net, there is a free tool we have called UMI, in which you can model blocks and groups of buildings and even neighborhoods and cities to explore their performance in terms of operational energy use, mobility, outdoor thermal comfort, daylighting, and embodied energy. So this is a picture from the city of Boston. We also are working with many cities around the world. Lisbon come to mind, Kuwait City, Riyadh, and many others. And my specific interest today is mobility, and this is my contribution basically. And I'm here to talk to you about my passion. I'm basically an architect, but I've moved to the realm of transportation because of the influence of the built environment on our mobility behaviors. So if you take a look at the picture on the right here, basically the way we perceive cities is similar to the way we perceived our solar system. So way before we thought that everything revolved around the Earth, which was something illustrated by Ian Lockwood here, which is complex and wrong. And then we moved forward and understood that we actually revolve around the sun. So take this metaphor and think about how we think in cities. Everything revolves around the car. We plan our cities for cars, and it is very complex and it's very wrong. Well, what we should be doing is planning our cities and basically retrofitting them for human beings, us basically. So the idea of human-centric design. So think of what we perceive as to be an up-and-coming city and Dubai. Basically, if you look at this picture, do you think this is Dubai or a picture from the Matrix in a post-apocalyptic future? Basically, where cars have dominated the streets, where people are living in monuments for our inhumanity. We don't know, there are no people in this picture. The people are all hidden somewhere. We've become so disconnected from the city, and I believe that we should be moving away from this. When I say Beirut, I don't think you think of this picture on the right, even though both pictures are from Beirut. We don't think about the cars. We don't think about being congested. What we think about is being within the city, being happy, being in a conversation, being in a public space, living in a human scale. And that's basically the idea of being in a walkable environment or a bikeable environment. And the idea of walkability is you wake up in the morning, you want to go somewhere, you should be able to go by foot. And that's why we promote walkability through density, and we promote density in urban environments. And why do we want to be walkable? Because we don't want our kids to be fat. Because we don't want to live in an environment that is not healthy. We want to save on fuel. We want to have less carbon footprints. We want to have less pollution. We want to live a healthy and sustainable life. We want to not spend money on cars, on car maintenance, and basically we want to live in economic viability where there are good economic exchange based on walkable environments. We don't want to live in a noise pollution, and we want social equity. We want the street to be accommodating for everyone. A walkable environment is a place where the car is not dominating the streets. The street becomes for a child, for a man, for a woman, for someone with a disability, not just for the cars. So there are many, many benefits for walkability, some of which are health. You get a prescription always from when you're getting older that you should be doing more exercise, you should be walking. And imagine if you wake up every day and whatever trip you're doing, you're going to work, you're going to grocery, you're visiting someone, it's a walking trip. You decrease dementia, you decrease diabetes, you decrease heart disease, arthritis. You can imagine depression. You can imagine many, many health benefits. Also, living in a bikeable environment. So May happens to be the National Bike Month Day in the US, and they do these infographics to make more people come on bikes. So they tell you you're going to burn more calories, and that's the best way to convince people. You're going to be less fat, so you're going to lose 13 pounds a year. Oh, that's great. I'm going to start biking now. They say 83% of Americans are saying that obesity is their #1 health problem, and we don't want that. So you don't want to decrease heart disease. We want to live in a healthy environment. But we also consider carbon emissions, and we talked about greenhouse gas emissions this morning, and these are two views of the city, basically. This is a study for Chicago, and the traditional view on the left shows that if you're living in a dense environment, that's what we perceive it, and we're partially right about pollution, but we perceive that living in a dense environment gives more greenhouse gas emissions, which is actually not true. The emerging view on the right for the same city, if we think about carbon emissions per capita, people who are living in suburbia, people who are living outside of the city, are producing more carbon because they're car dependent. If you're living in downtown, you almost don't use the car, or you use it for trips that are way far ahead. So basically, we can view that carbon emissions can be decreased if you're walking and biking everywhere. And think about it, how far can you travel on 1 ton of carbon? You can virtually, on the very far left, you can almost infinitely go walking and biking everywhere. But think about how much carbon do you need in order to operate a bus and have how many people you have there, which is good. You have more people on buses. But if you're operating a car with 1 or 2 people, or if you're on a motorcycle, how much carbon are you spending? And now comes the question, how do I become walkable or bikeable? So there's a theory called the General Theory of Walkability by Jeff Speck. It's a nice book called Walkable Cities. Basically, there are 4 ways to become more walkable. Has anyone heard of walkscore.com? Good. Oh, we have. Okay, that's great. So, but let me explain what it is, because the majority didn't. So walkscore.com is a website. You go on it and you put in your address and you get a score between 0 and 100 based on how many amenities or how many activities you have around you and within a walking distance. So that's the reason number 1. Number 1, have more amenities and activities around you. So living in a dense urban environment, you can imagine that you can have a cafe across the street and you walk over to it, or a restaurant, and this is great. The only problem is that in the MENA region, you probably would be committing suicide trying to cross a street. That's basically the whole problem. But we do have density. We do have access to many amenities around us, which is great. And then the second reason is safety. You want to have infrastructure that supports people on bikes. You want to have infrastructure that supports people walking and crossing safely. And you want to have basically lower crime rates. You have to feel comfortable, so that's reason number 3. So if it's too hot or it's too cold, that's one thing. And there's also comfort within the built environment itself. It's an enclosure. And then interest. If you're living in a boring environment, if the facades don't look nice, and if it's boring, you don't really want to walk. So have more trees, have more canopies for trees that surround the street, have interesting designs, have an interesting built environment. So with that aspect, we start to think about streets as a public space rather than a car-dominated place. So it becomes more for people. We know now that great streets are great for businesses. If you have a street that has many activities in it, that attracts people, and that actually increases, well, economic exchange and also land use value and basically real estate value. We also have to think about streets as something that can be changed. As in the first presentation, we don't add more streets. We can actually retrofit our streets to fit more people. So one way to explore this, the picture on the top left is a typical street with 4 lanes and one of them dedicated to car parking. If we add infrastructure immediately for bicycles, so a bicycle protected track where people are not, on bikes are not mixing with the cars, so they feel that they are safe, that would be part 1, and they're protected by the parked cars. We can also add, as we mentioned in the first presentation, BRT, bus rapid transit, basically having dedicated lanes for buses, making buses more reliable, on time, faster than the cars. If you want to get someone on the buses, make it faster than cars. Make them feel like the bus is actually a faster way to commute. And then we start thinking about how to design a pavement. So don't think of a pavement as a place for people to walk, if it exists, because I know it mainly doesn't exist in Cairo, but if it exists, think about how there could be a frontage where you can deal with selling goods and deal with cafes and restaurants. Think also about a furniture zone where you can place chairs and bicycle racks for people to park their bikes. And also if you can place the bicycle lane on that pavement, that would be ideal, because then people would feel like this pavement is theirs. So I'm going to take a couple of examples from around the world. Let's start from Boston, where I'm living currently. There's a transportation department that's promoting complete streets, basically. So complete streets is the idea of designing streets to accommodate multimodal travel behavior. So on the top left, bike sharing programs. So basically, if you don't want to own a bike, you think it's a hassle, you think you don't want to take care of it, you can actually have, and I actually happen to have this with me. I brought it with me this morning specifically. You have this key. So this key, if I take the bus in the morning and then for some reason I miss my second bus, I can take this key, put it into a bike sharing system, grab a bike and go from one station to the other, basically for free for the first half hour. And now you have people sharing bicycles and you have people sharing sustainable modes of transportation. In the picture in the top middle, basically having a viable living environment, having streets with cafes and places to sit outside. On the top right, bicycle racks and landscaping. Lower right, streets that are only for, and you're familiar with this in Beirut, of course, streets that are only for walking, for people, minimum car access. In the middle, lower middle, food trucks. Basically think about the food truck as a walking destination. If you're sitting in your office and you want to order food, well, think about if you have a food truck and it's actually very different food trucks all around you. You can every day, instead of ordering food, you can walk down there and exercise and interact with the built environment. And lastly, dedicated bus lanes on the lower left. Now that's the US example. In North America, I've seen a great change in terms of percentages of people biking when they add protected bike lanes, not just a lane that is just paint on the floor and on the road. You can add a lane, you can draw a lane, but cars will not respect it if there is no law abiding, basically. Or if they're abiding the law, people will fear that they're too close to the cars. If you protect the people, so basically you have four kinds of people who use the bikes. People who will bike no matter what happens, people who are interested and would be happy if there's a bike lane, people who are not really interested but they would venture it, and the majority of the population, especially in the MENA region, think they were born to drive. So you as someone growing up in Cairo, all what I was obsessed about is when I'm going to buy my car, when I'm going to have my car. So the youth, these people, how do you convince them? Give them infrastructure that is only for them, not is going to be mixed by car. Give infrastructure for someone who is older in age, and they will use it just to try it out because they have nothing to lose. There's no risk there. So in North America, they added protected bike lanes, and as you can see, for example, Philadelphia, 95% increase in bicycle ridership when they added just 11 miles of protected bicycle lanes. If we move to Europe, so I'm not going to talk about Amsterdam. Amsterdam is a very specific case. It's crazy biking there. Let's talk about something that can be a little bit more relevant. Copenhagen, for example, they have it. They figured it out. I'm talking about the US first because it's more relevant to the MENA region, because it's still trying to figure it out. But Europe figured it out a long time ago. So rush hour in Copenhagen, where 35% of the population commute to their work or study place each day on bicycles. This is a bicycle congestion, not car congestion. They don't think about cars anymore. So how did they do it? They have 650,000 bikes for 520,000 people. They have more bikes than people. And 48,000 bike racks, almost 430 kilometers of bike paths. And Copenhageners bike 1.27 million kilometers daily. They actually keep track of that. So they have a document produced every 2 years called the bicycle account, basically giving facts to people about where they were, where they're headed. And for example, from their latest one, 5 times more bicycles than cars, and 4 out of 5 of the Copenhageners have access to a bicycle, and they make families bike. So 28% of families with 2 children have a cargo bike where you can have your children in front of you and you bike, and 75% of the time they bike all year. So one question comes to mind when it comes to the MENA region immediately, it's too hot. We're not going to bike because it's too hot. So if Copenhagen has it, why can't we have it? Because this is a picture from the American University in Cairo on the left, and Art Institute, Modern Wing in Chicago in USA on the right, and we want shade. We want shade because it's too hot, and it's very different. In Chicago, for example, if there's the sun, you go out, you sit out, you want to enjoy the sun. In Egypt and the Middle East, you would think, I want to be in the shade, it's too hot outside. Well, we've been building buildings sparse away from each other, so we don't provide shade. We've been going about it actually the wrong way. So I've had the chance to speak about this briefly in a TEDx Cairo talk, and I'm not actually putting this to promote it. I'm actually putting this because something happened that I want to share with you. So you can take a look at it to understand more about outdoor thermal comfort, but this is the number of views from YouTube for the TEDx Cairo talk against time. And this would be a good segue for me to talk about the MENA region. So I'm going to be talking about two cities. I'm going to be talking about Cairo, not cities, countries. So Egypt and Cairo and the UAE. And something happened in June that piqued the interest of people watching the TEDx video. Can anyone guess what happened? I'm not going to ponder this for long, but something happened in mid-June. Has anyone seen this picture? So everyone started to watch the TEDx Cairo talk because the head of the state started using bicycles. So he did what's called the critical mass. Basically, how many have seen this picture before? Okay, good. I'm going to take a moment. The president basically took 5,000 people, people on bikes behind him and did what is called a critical mass. And everyone started riding bicycle that day to show the importance of bicycling. Of course, you can track many issues with this picture. One of them, not wearing a helmet. The whole fleet is wearing helmets. But anyway, the media immediately reacted. So ever since then, these are newspaper cuts that my mom sent to me the moment anyone talks about it, because she keeps tabs on newspapers and she knows I'm interested. And Fayoum heeds the call of Sisi. We are going to ride bicycles in Monofeya. The bicycle was made because we are going to take subsidy away from the gas. We are going to invite everyone to ride bicycles, and we want everyone at the start of the academic year to ride bicycles. The bicycle is the passion of all leaders around the world, and you can see here other leaders as well riding their bicycles. So the media reacted. This is good. This is not bad. So we have the media on your side. Let's ride bicycles. But did it actually change anything in the infrastructure? Well, two things happened. Two significant things happened since then. One is that the Prime Minister, Mehleb, basically turned Road 9 in Maadi into a pedestrian-only road on the weekends, and used Taftaf for I don't know what Taftaf is in Arabic, but in English. But Taftaf basically is like a bus. But anyway, closed by the Prime Minister. But on the right, the metro infrastructure in Heliopolis. So you're here promoting public transportation. We took it out. So two major things happening in parallel. I don't know what that means, but I want to ask, for whom is it being done, and by whom? So in New York, someone from like the DOT Commissioner of Transportation would take this. Why would the Prime Minister do this, and why? Why? For whom and why are they doing it? What is the motive? So I'm not seeking answers. I'm just giving you a frame of thought to think about it. Who is making the decisions? Why? How is the public participating in it? And what is next for this? So that's the case from Cairo. Of course, there's an issue with sexual harassment. I'm going to be open about this. In the picture on the left is Asyut, 1953, 58, I'm not sure. Basically, Asyut University was modeled to be like Cambridge University in England, with provision of bicycling, and women being on bicycles was something that's okay. Today, and I'm not going to show any pictures of sexual harassment, I'm just going to show you that this young lady was protesting, saying, "I want to ride a bicycle freely," to quote Freddie Mercury from Queen. Anyway, so yeah, we have an issue with that. If we are not making bicycling open for all genders, and walking and biking, and there's issues of safety, we're not going to go anywhere. So there is an issue of education before doing all of this, basically solving issues of sexual harassment. We go to the UAE. Abu Dhabi is to double walkways and bike trails by 2020, which is awesome as a piece of news. And they also have a tool out there. So if you go to the Abu Dhabi Urban Planning Council website, you can actually go to a tool where you design a street section that is accommodating for people and cars and bicycling all around, which is great. They also follow the bicycle account and having an international approach to it with walking and cycling master plan, which is open to the public. And as you can see here, there are women on bicycles. So has anyone seen the movie Wajda from Saudi Arabia? Okay, so one. Okay, so so this movie Wajda is about a young girl. All what she wants is to buy a bicycle, and seeing that the UAE is actually acknowledging that women should be on bicycles is awesome, is really great. So this is a good example from the UAE. However, as I talked about Dubai before, having a cycle track in the middle of the desert with nothing to go to is for sports. It's not for people. It's not for you and me. It's for people who want to cycle for sports. And I mean, we should be thinking about having infrastructure within the city itself. So to recap, this is Boston. This is from Complete Streets Boston. We can have a street. The street on the left is anywhere. It could be anywhere. And you can make it like the street on the right, with priority to pedestrians, with bicycle infrastructure, with cars being on the street, if you have money. But no, this is a lane. This is a bicycle lane. This is paint. This is not money. But yeah, if you have money, I could do more awesome things, of course. But there's also the idea of sharing economy. So if you're going to use the car, there's the Zip car on the top left, which is basically car sharing. I don't drive in Boston, my wife does. And we have an account with Zip car. And basically when we want to go to Walmart once a month or once every couple of months, we rent a car basically for a couple of hours, go and come back. There's also shared riding with Lyft and Uber. So basically you can, as someone who owns a car, become a taxi driver and get paid for taking people around, which is awesome. And you can also share bicycles. So City Bike from New York City, for example, is an example of that. So sharing, if you're going to use cars, use it in a smart way, basically. So if we're talking about a policy perspective, to sum up what I just said, promote health, promote environmental issues, and promote bicycling. Think about right of way and how to deter the vehicle, how to make car use less. Think about how to have bike share fleets, how to have bicycle rentals. I know, I asked the taxi driver yesterday, you have bicycle renting here in Beirut, and actually people bike, I've seen people biking, it's just not very safe. Allow biking on rail systems if you have a metro or if you have buses. If you're buying new buses then in Beirut, then make bicycles part of it. You can actually put bicycles in front of on buses. And then think about infrastructure. If you're going to do a critical mass, you're going to let everyone bicycle. If you're going to have the news talking about it, have bicycle paths, have bicycle lanes on streets, have bicycle parking, bicycle shelter and bicycle storage. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking of someone stealing the bicycle, and yes, it happens, and it happens a lot. Someone tried to steal the back wheel of my bicycle and failed, and I figured it out because the back wheel wasn't fit. Stealing the back wheel, I mean, anyway. So if we're thinking about which smart mobility future, because smart mobility, when you think about smart, you think about GPS, you think about technology. But what is smart really? Is it smart to have this view, the car-dominated, auto-oriented, congested streets with all of its pollution, carbon emissions, and health problems, or have a future for our kids, a future for our elders, a future for us as human beings, centered on us? I think that the answer is pretty easy, and there's this idea of the 880 cities. Look it up. Basically, having cities for 80-year-olds and 80 years old. And I think I've drove my idea about human-centered design quite well by now. So thank you very much, and I hope we don't ever see this on our streets ever again.
Thank you, Tariq. We will continue with Mr. Hans Forke.
Want to switch?
So we leave room for questions and answers at the end. Mr. Forke studied architecture and urban development, as well as anthropology and philosophy. He worked as an architect in Germany. later turned more to urban development. He founded Indonesia's first environmental education center in 1990, an NGO with 3 centers, as well as an urban environmental information center in Surabaya. He worked in Indonesia for over 20 years, in Vietnam for 6 years, and now as a consultant for the African Development Bank.
Actually, the Asian Development Bank.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. I was invited to talk about some examples or some experience we had gained in Indonesia. Not that I can share very successful stories, because Indonesia is actually in a mess. It is the fact that I think that happens all over the world, that the richer we become, the more our cities are deteriorating because of the wealth. And the first step that was just mentioned, that people are still tending to want to buy an own vehicle, a car or a motorbike. Indonesia is in exactly that, and the paradigm that is the car-centered planning and urban development is still the reality, but there is a shift in the government and in the public as well, because it's just unbearable how our cities are getting congested and polluted. And a gridlock is not even 10 years, but it's in front of our doors. So gridlocks in Jakarta happen daily for hours, and the total gridlock is expected to be next year maybe, because every day there's another 700 new cars being put into the streets of only the capital, Jakarta, and even more motorbikes, because now people tend to buy motorbikes because that's the even faster way to get through the traffic congestions, but now the congestion is done by the motorbikes. Now I'm talking a bit about what we have experienced. I was the head of a program from GIZ, the Sustainable Urban Transport Improvement Program, for 5 years, which I just terminated 3 weeks ago. And we had a 2-tier approach, actually. We were consulting or advising the government on the national level with policies and measures that would eventually and hopefully soon come to implementations. And we, at the same time, were working with 4 selected cities in Indonesia. Indonesia has about 400 cities. And selected 4 cities we took as examples where we implemented certain measures. Among them, of course, the development of public transport, multimodal public transport, and the integration of multimodal public transport, not only in physical ways that the stops and intersections became integrated, but as well in ways of ticketing. And first attempts of that in the implementation have been achieved. We had been working, or are still underway of working on transport impact control, which was just mentioned as well. Measures that become a law to have developments of a certain size being under demand to come up with the impact study that would drive them into mitigation actions that greater developments must undergo. Similar to an environmental impact control measure, the transport import control measures were implemented in Indonesia. Furthermore, we were looking into potentials of transit-oriented developments, and this might be of interest for architects and urban developers, as integrating transit hubs into business developments, which we gained from examples of several international cities that have successfully implemented these. One of the best examples is Hong Kong, where the MTR company is making profits not by ticket sales, or only partly by ticket sales, but in the first place by real estate developments, where they are granted the right to, as a private company actually, granted the right to develop new lines in green lands, in green fields, and through that, gaining higher value of the locations, of course, and not only building a station, but building the whole real estate with shopping malls and apartments and everything that is feasible to be developed in these green fields in the new territories, and that became a very successful concept which we try to apply and now are under planning, and we did help the pre-design for a transit-oriented development in Bogor, a city outside of Jakarta or part of Greater Jakarta, where on the transit line of the commuter railway there was the potential to build a new station outside of the city, still in the municipality or in the city limits, but out of the city center, where up to now people are commuting into that city center to hop on the train and congesting the roads. And the mayor we talked to many times on that issues saw as well that there is no benefit for the city that all these people from the real estates around the city of Bogor would use their roads to get to the station, but rather go into the new station that is now under development as a transit-oriented development plan, where not only the train station would be central, but the bus lines would directly go and become an integral part of the station itself. The idea is of having the bus becoming or getting a known platform, so that you just hop off the bus and into the train on the other side of the platform. And of course the paratransit systems are as well integrated there, but accessibility for walking and pedestrians is paid attention to, as well as biking and park and ride facilities for bikers as well as for cars, of course. So that is a project that in concrete terms is underway. What I want to talk about is a bit more in abstract terms, that we are on 3 levels in advice for a government that in our case in Indonesia was in the first place being approached through the political decision-making process. The need to align a common policy for urban mobility is of course a common place to say, but it's not an easy thing to do because there are so many parties involved, and the integration of all the different parties is a difficult task, because there is of course the Ministry of Transportation, which we had been working together with intensely. That was our major partner, but as well the Ministry of Planning, which is even an umbrella above them and of maybe even greater political importance. We try to integrate into the discussion, and there is many other, like the Public Works Ministry, even of a bigger budget, that builds the roads, that is very car-centered until now, and that needs to be integrated into the discussion. So the integration of the different players and putting them on a table together and talking together and seeing a common vision of where our cities are going to be developed and what are the measures to get there must be the first place to do, and that's what we approached the whole thing. And together with the partners in the ministries, we wrote or compiled a so-called Grand Design, which is a policy paper on urban transport, and that is now becoming the foundation of planning and of future developments all over the place, all over Indonesian cities. The second, of course, we need technical solutions that are superior to what we have until now, and to create innovations in technical, conceptual and design solutions for urban mass rapid transit networks is under demand, because so far, and that counts for worldwide operations, except of these few good examples like the Hong Kong example, so far in most cities all over the world, public transport needs subsidies and highly subsidized programs that tends to get the government a bit shy on investments, because of it's not just the investment subsidy, but it's operational subsidies that are under demand, and that of course is not too interesting for the Ministry of Finance or others. So we are convinced, and we have been working on technical solutions, and I don't know whether we have the time to get into detail of these, of the question of how can we reduce investment costs and operational costs of mass rapid transit technical solutions that are available these days. And the third part that our advice or our cooperation has been focusing on is the need to make public transport profitable. that means the financial aspects of it, and that means that we have to convince, as we had learned yesterday as well, again, that the congestion or the car-based transport modes are costing us too much. Just as an example, as a figure, Jakarta has calculated about $6 million a day of losses because of congestion. And that is not just the fuel that is being wasted, but in the first place, the productivity of people that are held in their cars for hours. And it's a commonplace today that people in my office, for example, but that is what counts for nearly everybody, that people commute for about 2 hours a day to get to work and another 2 hours to get home from work. And that is just not bearable. And the suffering, I mean, is on one hand, I saw it often as with a smile that was to be expected because of people suffering of the transport and talking about transport as the Londoners talk about the weather, that there is a stage where eventually the public outcry or the public would put pressure to the politicians and say we need a different system and need a different approach, and not just some improvements, but we need a radical change. And we feel like we are on the edge of getting that finally done and getting into that not common, but the mutual vision of the public as well as the government and the different parties in the government to see the long-term vision. Where do we want to have our cities to be like in something like in 25 years? So a long-term vision, looking into a future that is not based on the concepts from today or yesterday that Indonesia still, as car-based policies remain being dwelling on, but seeing of where do we have to go and where do we want to be. And things have been mentioned here. We want a livable city, and we want a city that I will explore a bit later. The policy and the vision, of course, must be shared by all. That's what I mentioned, that it's so important to coordinate between the different ministries and the different players, so that at the end they are not drawing the whole concept into different areas. As it's happening now, I mean, while we are talking about livable cities and about walkability of cities, the Ministry of Public Works is building flyovers and extending roads and building new roads and so on and so forth, as we have already since long learned, and it's proven that building new roads, extending roads is only inducing more traffic, and the congestion is just following. The whole thing will happen months later, and we haven't gained anything but lost a lot of money by these investments. But that must be clear, that must be shared by all, and only then we can get into that one common policy and one shared mutual vision. Otherwise, everybody draws into the different directions. This is just an example from Indonesia, the different players that would be there, the ministries. I don't have to explain these all, but just as a symbol of how many are playing an important role. The Ministry of Public Works, as I mentioned, is one of the addresses where we are trying to get hold of. The vision, this is not an Indonesian city, it's actually a Latin American, but it's just an example that we want our inner cities free of private cars and other vehicles, and public transport, walking and biking to become the first choice of transport. And it's surprisingly well accepted, meanwhile, in Indonesian politics to see that vision and to see, and it is implanted into the grand design, into that policy paper, or the white paper you would call it. And being said that in the next 25 years, Indonesian inner cities, I mean, how to define an inner city is up to the authorities, because we have a decentralized government in Indonesia now. It's not all being directed from the national government only. The autonomy of the cities leave the space of designing and dividing and defining the policy within the city and the public transport system and the planning and everything. And so it would be free to define what is an inner city for us. Do we start only with the old center or the old quarters, or do we go further and be brave of defining an inner city as the whole central business district or whatever? There will be a vast multimodal network of public transport. This is the declared aim and way to go. And cities are providing public space for walking. Public space is a very limited asset. Indonesian cities have an under-average proportion of public space. Roads in Indonesian cities are less than 10% of the size of a city, so that means that with that limited space, the congestion, of course, is programmed, and with the wealth of the Indonesians after economic growth, there is with that limited assets a need to turn these streets back for biking and walking, and that is what Indonesia is going to do and going to at least have declared as policy. Walking and strolling and meeting, it was mentioned what we see as a livable city. And we see an elevated rail, which we feel like is for big cities the solution as a backbone for public transport. Addressing urban transport problems gives the great opportunity to solve a number of important issues. So it's not just a one linear aim of getting the congestion solved, but we're reducing greenhouse gases, of course, which is a big aim. Indonesia has acknowledged and declared and confessed to reduce 26% of their greenhouse gases until 2020. And even 41% under the condition that international cooperation would add to that, but out of their own efforts, 26% is quite an ambitious goal, and this is declared by the president and is a goal that is internationally acknowledged, and now they're working very hard on that. Improving public health, we mentioned that, we know how important these pollution factors are. I want to mention one thing, and I think it counts for many cities, but what we calculated in Indonesia was that the argument or the reasoning of not walking and not biking because of the heat, and of course we are in the tropics in Indonesia, and there's an average temperature of 30 degrees daily, and at night not much less, that people say we won't walk and we won't bike because it's so hot. Is actually only a reason that is not really valid. Indonesia was walking and biking before the cars evolved 20, 30 years ago, and it was comfortable to do so. What we calculated was that only by the presence of cars in a city, and all the cars and the congestion and the cars and their burning fuels, our cities are about 2 degrees hotter than they would be without them, because what cars produce in heat is not only from their engines, but the whole infrastructure, the roads, the absorptivity of asphalt and pavements is so big that a city that would be turning their paradigm away from car-based into human-based planning would have streets that are, of course, then much better to be shaded, because we can plant trees everywhere and not only on the roadside, because if a street becomes pedestrianized, we don't have that obstacles and we can, of course, besides the trees as well have man-made shelters that would shade our roads. So we could reduce a lot of that, and it's just a vicious circle. If we get away from the cars, we could gain a comfortable climate, and below 30 degrees we always would accept a climate of that. We increase the productivity, of course, if we get into a system that would really make people mobility increased by walking and public transport, and not being caught in traffic jams. We would save energy, of course. We would enhance the safety and reclaim the public space, which me as an architect, or a lot of architects would see as how important it is to make a city livable by turning public space into a place where people meet and walk and enjoy their life. Shared vision goes into cities are providing public space for walking and strolling, sitting, meeting, playing, chatting, biking, and living in the inner city streets, where easy access to the full coverage of urban multimodal public transport is created. Walking access to these different modes of transport is, of course, of high importance. We cannot see public transport only as a bus lane, or as what was mentioned before, as putting 200 new buses into a city is not enough. It's as important as these vehicles is the accessibility for a pedestrian to the shelters and the bus stops, which often was neglected, at least in Indonesia, that they put the buses into it, but accessibility was so poor that people didn't really feel attracted to use them. I'm going a bit faster through that, thank you. Technical and financial challenges in providing the backbone of sustainable urban transport. Performance boosting solutions are emerging in form of energy saving, speed increasing, elevated MRT lines. That's what I have mentioned. We have developed concepts of an elevated MRT that would be much cheaper than the conventional ones, because we designed stations that are only as big as one wagon, because we only left a wagon stopping at each station. The train goes through and the wagons are connecting to the running train that will never stop, because, but that's a concept that maybe I cannot have the time here to explore in detail. Whoever is interested, I would be pleased to do so. The even more severe constraints in missing urban mobility solutions are recognized and that's the examples from Indonesia. We have a very fragmented planning and a lack of planning, of course, as well. As we don't even have a transport master plan, which is now underway. We have, with our project, advising the government to develop transport master plans in several cities, in our partner cities, as I mentioned. The lack of planning as well as the partial or timid and non-existing implementation of these plans that are existing. There is, of course, some master plans of development, not necessarily transportation master plans, but urban development master plans, but they are not implemented because the reality goes faster than the plan would ever be amended or being renewed. Overestimation of lobby and interest groups is an issue that we feel that the government is often shy of taking decisions because of fearing that there's other parties that might not be happy with these decisions, and then better do not do any decision. And that's a very common concept that decision makers within the government in Indonesia would shy off any steps to do because of the fear of that this whoever might come up and say this is not in my interest. And we often don't know, because it's not so transparent, that the mixture of maybe higher ranking officials within the government with private business, and of course we have as well a corrupt system that easily is mixing their interests with their duties. The lack of leadership is an issue. We are very optimistic, as we have just newly elected a new president in Indonesia that comes from a very different corner and seems to bring a very different approach into politics. And it happened that president now was the mayor of Jakarta before, until now, the governor of Jakarta, we call it. And before being a governor of Jakarta, he was the mayor of a little city, Solo, with 500,000 inhabitants, and that was one of our partner cities. So we know him very well from the time working with him, and we are happy that he became president now, and hopefully have a bit of access to him as well, as he had been very dedicated to build up public transport systems within the city of Solo, where he was the mayor, and the walkability. And we had implemented some of these projects, walkability, pedestrianization, and so on. Solid national policy based on that vision is under demand, and it's going to happen. Mass rapid transit, the urban rail network, I'm skipping that because that's the issue that I would like to share at another occasion. The technical concepts of how can we reduce the investment costs and the operational costs, and the operational costs of a transit system in the first place are lying in the energy demand. A train that is being accelerated from a station when it takes off needs a lot of energy for that. Once it's running, it doesn't need that much energy, but the acceleration at each station, and that is why an urban rail demands a lot of energy, because it stops every here and then and accelerates the whole heavy 5, 6, 7 wagons again. And there are potentials to reduce the operational costs tremendously, because what's the aim of I mean, maybe a very ambitious aim, but if we can only make public transport free of subsidies, it would create a very different situation, because not only the private sector would be keen to invest into it, but as well we would we would have a vast system there, and we would have an attractive system there, and we would not have a shy government that doesn't want to put too much money into it because they fear the ongoing operational costs to be subsidized. These are just some examples here, and that's about the MRT of our solution. So public transport systems have their issues in the construction operation. So these two issues, and where they gain money back from is the revenues, is not only the ticketing, as I mentioned, it was mentioned yesterday as well, there's a potential of advertising and these kind of, but that's a side effect that we are happy to take into as well, but that might only add up some 5% maybe of the whole turnover. But an important issue is the transit-oriented development, because when we provide public transport, we create an added value to the space where we are presenting our stations, our hubs, and our accessibility for the citizens. And with the gained value of land, to capture that value, what we call transit-oriented development should be remaining within those that have been providing the public transport network, and not as it is so far that the authorities are providing public transport networks and the private sector is creaming off the added value by building real estates around it. But if we can connect that and either tax these that are having the gained values out of the higher value of the location, or by doing it by the company itself, as MTR in Hong Kong does, or others can do, then we might come to the point where and I skipped that now because of the time, where we get to the break-even point, where the revenues are increasing, where the investment cost, the green line, is reduced and the operational costs are reduced, so that at the end of the day we make public transport a profitable operation, because the citizens need mobility and are willing to pay. They pay much more for their private vehicles, just of the pride of using them. But I think that is slightly getting over, at least in Europe or in Germany, where I'm from. These days, people are no longer, the young generations, no longer keen of owning an own car, at least not the urban population, as it was when I was young, and of course was keen to get an own car at the time. So avoid, shift, improve is a very basic concept, where we say key to all attempts is to avoid the use of private vehicles in cities, to shift passengers to walking, biking and public transport, and to improve all modes of performance. The parallel steps that we have to go, we step to gradually ban fuel subsidies. That is an issue in Indonesia, but I heard in the MENA region similarly. Fuel in Indonesia is subsidized to billions of dollars that the government loses by these subsidies. The liter of gasoline costs about 50 cents, and on the world market more than $1. And that is one of the steps that is necessary to be taken, because the cheap fuel makes private cars and motorbikes often more attractive, of course. And when we calculate it, is a ride by a motorbike is cheaper than going public transport within the city of Jakarta, because the fuel is so cheap, and to buy a motorbike is very cheap. You can buy a motorbike for $50 as a down payment, and then a monthly paying off. So I thank you for the attention. Sorry that I was a bit too long, but there's a lot to share, and I'm happy for a discussion on that. Thank you very much.
We have 15 to 20 minutes for questions. Yes, please.
Hi, good morning. My question is for Tariq Rakha. Hi. Thank you for the presentation. It was really insightful and quite rich. However, and this is a personal concern, I'm very suspicious about street guidelines and design guidelines. We all know that there's good transportation planning 101 concepts and methods. However, when we see the proliferation of such design guidelines that you can download and share and apply, How do you safeguard, through your work at the MIT lab, how do you guys safeguard the specificity of each city? What makes it different to walk, if we apply those just good, decent street design guidelines to 3 different cities in the world, how will you safeguard that specificity that when you walk in a street in Beirut or in Boston, something will be different aside from, you know, the obvious language, architectural expression, but in terms of form and relationship between the built environment and public and private space?
Okay, so thank you very much for your question. Let me clarify one thing. My work at the Sustainable Design Lab is actually different than the production of such guidelines. My work at the Sustainable Design Lab, I work as a building scientist, and we develop tools and methods to analyze the built environment, which is very different from production of these guidelines. But let me give you the response that I have heard from policymakers. These guidelines are a reaction to guidelines that were previously developed by transportation engineers to promote car use. So as a reaction, NACTO, for example, in the US, produced these guidelines in order to help local authorities adapt such guidelines to their local situations. So by no means, these are not general applicable guidelines to every situation. I can imagine a situation where if you add a bike lane in a street in Cairo, it would be abused by Vespa users and motorcycle users. So I would highly recommend that policymakers use these guidelines as a visual medium, like I used them in this presentation, and adapt them to their specific situations with empowerment of law enforcement. It is very different in the MENA region, and it's very different from one city to the other. But I believe your question is right on the money when it comes to how to use them. Thank you.
Hello, Sarah Yassin, urban planner. Both your talks and the presentation that Yusuf delivered as well resonate with ideas of placemaking. We're like looking at the city not as only infrastructure, but as a series of landscapes that are layered, that are connected through urban transit and urban mobility. As someone who's been working on Beirut for a while, in my opinion, when we look at Beirut, it's not the lack of studies or ideas, it's the lack of vision, a coherent vision to look at all these layers, and a lack of one overarching body. I don't think that the Ministry of Transport or the Ministry of Finance is the right body to look at, or the right stakeholder to look at all that together. I think, like in all cities, look at Paris, look at London, we need a mayor, we need a municipality that is carrying forward this vision for the city and stitching together all the gaps in all different institutions and organizations. I don't know whether you have any comments or thoughts you could share on that.
Okay, maybe I start first with, yes, we're right, we are in line with that. I would like to mention one thing that is what we call a 3D approach, or triple D. D stands for density. It was mentioned as well how important it is to make our cities dense, so that the density would mean that walking distance is short enough to be taken. The second is the diversity. As the more diverse our cities are being made, the more we have in our neighborhood of our needs. And the third is the design of our cities, which in the future will look into a third dimension where we don't have only our roads as platforms, but we are having skywalks and access into the elevated rail systems and other elevated issues that connect directly into the whole urban tissue or into the structures around. So this just as a mentioning into where we align with seeing a city from the livability of a city, how it is designed and how the livability of a city is.
Yeah, I have something to add. So in the 60s, the Death and Life of Great American Cities was written, and it was this wild idea that the car is actually our enemy. And then people started educating current leaders in the United States. So Yes, no ministry on its own can work. Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Transportation, Ministry of Urban Planning on their own cannot work, cannot function. But in order for all of them to function towards the same goal, you need education. So if you educate the leaders of today for tomorrow, you will get it done. So to answer your question about it being the role of leadership and the role of the Mayor of London, for example, with a very quirky accent and his hair, he's very, very impressive. Yes, this is the kind of people we need. No, you can't do it in segments. You need people like you who come in the future and take leadership roles to work with others, leaders who are educated as well about these concepts to be able to implement them. My thinking is not do it now, is not wait for 20 years, do it now, but I'm not very sure how to.
Hi, thank you very much for both of your presentations. I'm just down here. I agree greatly with what a colleague has said about the need of the municipalities to intervene, especially in the case of Beirut. Unfortunately, we have a municipality, as was mentioned yesterday, that is currently sitting on $1 billion surplus. They recently published a very alluring booklet with various possibilities of how they would like to increase public space and how they want to do all kinds of things with lighting and transportation, especially with public space. One of the biggest of these ideas is to turn an entire street, an artery street in Beirut, into a green space, a biker-friendly space, one-way car street. This was about over a year ago that this project was brought to the public, and ever since it has gone under various constant redesign phases, and they're still at the point where they have not decided on anything. But for sure now, it will be a two-lane car design. And I mean, it's just, I guess what I wanted to ask is clearly everyone needs to collaborate. This is something we know. The question is, how does this happen in a city like Beirut, where there's all kinds of political issues? But even more, personally, I'm not particularly somebody who is very much a fan of the private sector. However, I realize in a country as corrupt as this and as dysfunctional in some ways, that the private sector is necessary. So how would you both, what do you think about the introduction of private sector, public transit means, and how can they work together? What are different possibilities of them managing something together?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Maybe a short notion. Private-public partnerships have often failed, at least in our experience in Indonesia. But you're totally right. It is so important to get the private sector here. And what I mentioned is if we can get into at least approach the reducing subsidies or even getting away from them, then the private sector is of course keen and would be there. So far, and not only in Indonesia, but in many other countries, the operators of public transport are private. I mean, there are cities that operate their public transport systems by municipality, but in many cases it's privately operated. And the schemes are various. There are various schemes of how they are being done, but that of course is where the private sector comes in. When it comes to the assets of a city like public space, I mean, there is, from my view, not the easy approach of getting the private sector directly into doing the job that the municipality has to be doing. But what we clearly know is pedestrianizing so far car-based road in a city makes the turnover of the private sector that has outlets or restaurants or whatever kind of business around that area so much higher that the experience of the private sector of getting at least traffic calming within their realm is so great that those that are aware of that and that know that are keen to help making the inner city free or at least traffic calmed. And there we could, of course, say if we get together here, the private sector should as well contribute and help us doing something on that. Just one very short notion about how your example of having the budget here in Beirut and looking into what other projects we can do. I'm convinced how dangerous it is if we are not getting into a full-fledged concept of a whole system. If a government, and I've often experienced that in cities where there is that timid approach of saying, okay, we will try now a little bit, and we build a bike lane, for example. But how much does it make sense to build 2 kilometers of a bike lane within a city, which starts at one point and ends at the other point? I mean, people will not come with their bike on their shoulders or in their car and stop here and start biking for 2 kilometers and then they stop again. What we need is really to get into a system of a critical mass that allows to be successful. The same thing about public transport. If we start public transport lines and the headway is too long, people are not coming to use it. If we have to wait half an hour for a bus, we just don't use it. We take a taxi or our private vehicles. So just to mention that to get into a system, we have to get fully fledged into the whole concept that integrates the whole experience of a journey from the first mile to the last mile and all what is in between. And if we only have a part of it being implemented, it will not be successful, and then the government will say, well, see, it doesn't work, our culture is not prepared for biking or for walking, so we leave it. So very important to get fully into these concepts.
One note on corruption. I'm not going to talk about corruption in Lebanon. I have no idea, but I know about us. So if something in the public works is not working, give it to the private sector. That's all the note I can tell you. If something so for example, the metro in Cairo, it's working. We don't need the private sector. If something is not working and you want it done, you get the private sector. They put their nice marketing plans, but you get things to work. That has been my experience in terms of things that function. I'm not sure if it would be the same situation here.
Yes, you came across one of the issues regarding promoting biking in summer. I think one of the solutions is to have a flexible umbrella with a fan that operating by solar energy, and that will come up the problem. And then also you need to focus on education, awareness, and educating the leaders as well. I think this is one of the solutions. But again, to Friedrich, you mentioned about promoting less car in inner city. How are you going to lobby against the car manufacturing, especially in Germany, where they're producing 12% of the GDP of Germany?
You're very right, but the car industry is very aware of that. I mean, they're not stupid. They are seeing the future, and they're seeing that they're losing the market in cities. I'm not against cars. I like to drive a car, but cars for the future are meant to get out of town and not within the cities. So the market for cars will be out of town. And big companies like Mercedes-Benz, for example, they are not only in the private car production, but they're producing buses and other things. So public transport is so much under demand that this is a big market. And if they are only clever enough, they go into the future systems that are under demand. They do already, which is a bit contradictory if you want to say that the car sharing systems in Germany, for example, all these big car manufacturers are heavily investing into these car share systems. There's Car2Go by Mercedes, there's Drive Now by BMW, and so on and so forth. Although it would lead to that urban populations would say, oh, I don't need an own car anymore, so they don't buy a car from these companies, but they are becoming member in these car share concepts and just use a car from time to time. So the market for the car industry in the cities is reducing. They're aware, it's just a fact. And the fact is not only greenhouse gases and pollution and all that, it's merely, and that's just, I think, the most important thing we have to be aware of. Public space is so limited. We don't have the space if our societies, which we all wish, is growing economically even further, and wealth is gained and middle class is evolving and all can afford a car. We don't have the space for it in cities. So we just have to forget the idea of owning a car if you're an urban population. Different to rural populations, just fine to have a car. In the future, of course, rather an electric driven or a hybrid or a fuel cell or whatever, but that's future technologies that are all there. The fuel driven cars will be out of the business. So the car industry would and does look into the future of where they have their markets.
Unfortunately, time is up for this. Thank you all for coming, and thank you, Mr. Raha and Mr. Fouki, for your.
Thank you.